This is a screen recording of Chapter 10, Part 2. Please follow along in your textbook. I was only 8 years old at the time of the smallpox. My first memory was that of my oldest brother and a younger sister being sick. These two died in one night, with my father following shortly afterwards. Just before I fell off to sleep, I heard my mother express the fear that she would not see another day. "What will happen to my little children?" she said. That was the last time I ever heard her speak. So this is told by Antoine Gibet to Joseph F. Dion in My Tribe Decrees. So this is an actual thing that happened to people at the time. Smallpox killed many people and many First Nations people because they did not have immunity to the diseases that the Europeans brought. Forming Canada. Why did Canada expand to the west? In the 1860s, representatives from the British North American colonies met to decide whether to join to form a country. Some of the colonies' representatives felt that there would be advantages to joining together. The British colonies could trade and sell goods to each other more easily than selling to other countries. Many people feared the United States would try to take over the British colonies. The British colonies could work together to defend themselves. Together, the colonies would be able to afford to build a railroad. This would allow settlers to move west and expand Canada. On July 1st, 1867, the colonies of the province of Canada, now called Quebec and Ontario, Nova Scotia and New Brunswick, joined in confederation to form the country of Canada. Canada's government and laws would be based on those of Britain. The work of the Canadian government would be done in French and English. Victoria was the Queen of Canada. Compare the map on this page with a present-day map of Canada. What is similar and what is different? So if you look at this map, as you can see, there are some provinces that are missing. Alberta is missing, Saskatchewan is missing, and it's actually called Rupert's Land. Part of Alberta, the north of Alberta, is actually, at the time, was called the Northwest Territories. Why do you think only 4 of the British colonies joined in Confederation? Where is Alberta? Why is it not shown on the map? Becoming the Northwest Territories. John A. Macdonald was the first Prime Minister of Canada. He wanted to enlarge Canada. He had a vision of a country that went from sea to sea. In 1870, the new government of Canada obtained the Northwestern Territory from Great Britain. This included Rupert's Land, controlled by the Hudson's Bay Company. Canada had to pay the Hudson's Bay Company $11.5 million for these lands. These new parts of Canada were called Northwest Territories. The area that is now Alberta was once part of it. It was a large area of land. The government felt it needed settlers to populate the large territory. The good farmland could draw many settlers to the west. However, the Northwest Territories had some problems that had to be solved before many people would feel safe to settle there. So this is an ad at the time because they wanted people to come and settle. Cheap land in the northwest of Canada, 160 acres for only $10. Each farmer must have 30 acres planted and have a permanent dwelling within 3 years. The government encouraged settlement with offers of cheap land. It is widely known that there are increasing problems in our Northwest Territories since 1869. United States whiskey traders have been occupying parts of our territory. They trade rot gut whiskey and guns for buffalo hides. These traders have even dared to build forts on Canadian soil. The names of these forts, such as Fort Whoop Up, Robber's Roost, and Slide Out, speak of lawlessness. There are worse problems in the Cypress Hills area. Men who call themselves wolfers have been poisoning the wolves for their furs and disrupting the regular fur trade. Many First Nations and Métis people have been threatened and murdered. What is our leader, the Honorable John A. Macdonald, going to do about the situation? The people in the Western lands must be made safe again. Something must be done. What problems had to be solved before settlers would want to come? What might some solutions be to the problems be? Number 2, do you think the government should have asked First Nations and Métis people how they felt about settlement? Explain your point of view. So at the time, when people were settling, there weren't really laws and there was nobody to enforce laws. So people started building fur trading posts on areas that didn't belong to them. So, in order to encourage people to move and settle in Canada, the Northwest Mounted Police was created. It was formed. Okay, the Northwest Mounted Police. How did the Northwest Mounted Police provide safety for people in the West? The Northwest Mounted Police was formed in 1873. It had three main purposes: to show the Western prairies were controlled by Canada, to bring law and order, to stop the whiskey trade. The police force was organized similarly to the British Army. Hundreds of men were recruited. Wanted: men for the mounted police force for the Northwest Territories. Must be between the ages of 18 and 40. Must be strong, able to ride, active, and of good character. Must be able to read and write either English or French. Pay is 75 cents a day for sub-constables, $1 a day for constables. The men wore bright red jackets that could be seen for kilometers, a symbol of law and order. The Northwest Mounted Police represented Canada at various royal occasions for the monarchy. They participated in the ceremony, for example, when King Edward was crowned king in 1902. In 1904, the king added royal to the force's name and they became the Royal Northwest Mounted Police. Beginning in 1920, the force became responsible for law enforcement across Canada, so their name was changed to Royal Canadian Mounted Police. The March West. Nearly 400 men were trained for the new force. On July 8, 1874, most of the force started the trip westward from Dufferin. Their job was to locate Fort Whoop-Up and destroy the whiskey trade. Some of the officers went to Fort Edmonton and Fort Macleod. The 275 officers and constables took various supplies: 142 oxen for pulling the carts, 114 Red River carts, large wheeled wooden carts, 93 head of cattle, 310 horses, 73 wagons, 4 heavy guns, mowing machines, forages for metal repairs, and movable kitchens. What importance do you think the events on these 2 pages have to Alberta? So this is a map titled The March West. As you can see, the arrows represent, if you look at the legend, the dark arrow represents route to Fort Whoop-Up, route to Fort Macleod, and route to Fort Edmonton. On trek. Commissioner George Arthur French, the leader of the force at the time, wrote about the experiences of the Northwest Mounted Police. On their trek west, some parts of these journal entries are shown here. So these are some journal entries about the travel on their trek west. So these are some of the things that the Northwest Mounted Police experienced. Okay. July 8, 1873, left Dufferin. July 11th, got a few buckets of water by digging in the mud. Land good, no wood or water. July 12, heavy thunderstorm, hailstones as large as walnuts. July 21st, grass very poor, being dried up or eaten by grasshoppers. July 30th, remained all day at Wood and Depot to secure a supply of wood. For 3 days more, I narrowly escaped a bad injury, my horse falling in one of the countless badger holes. Bed after 12 and getting up again at 4 a.m. So you can read some of these accounts. Just pause the screencast and you can finish reading these journal entries. How did the geography and natural environment affect the journey? So how did the environment affect their journey? In the west, part of Northwest Mounted Police force was sent to Fort Edmonton. The rest headed for Cypress Hills to deal with the whiskey traders and wolfers. The group arrived at the empty Fort Whoop-Up and took it over. The whiskey traders had run away and never reappeared. Many First Nations people began to trust the police force because they got rid of the wolfers. The United States had been expanding. New states were formed along the American and Canadian border in 1867. The United States bought Alaska. The presence of the Northwest Mounted Police helped show the Northwest Territories was Canadian. Many forts were constructed for the Northwest Mounted Police. These included Fort Calgary, Fort Normandeau at Red Deer, and Fort Macleod. Several forts were named after the men in charge of that fort. A group of Northwest Mounted Police were stationed at the busy crossing at the Red Deer River. The fort was named after Lieutenant J.E. Bedard Normandeau. Fort Macleod was named after Colonel James F. Macleod. This photo shows the community of Fort Macleod today. Named in Alberta. Inspector Brebois was sent to build a new fort where the Elbow and Bow Rivers meet. He wanted to name the fort after himself, Fort Brebois. Brebois changed his mind about the fort's site. This caused delays, so the fort was not built by winter. This caused hardships for the men, and Brebois was unpopular as a result. Colonel Macleod came to sort things out. He changed the name of the fort to Fort Calgary after a place in Scotland. Assembly of the Northwest Territories. How did the Assembly of Northwest Territories affect people's quality of life? When the Northwest Territories became a part of Canada, the government put a lieutenant governor and council in charge. He represented the Queen. David Laird served as lieutenant governor of the Northwest Territories from 1867 to 1881. The first government members were appointed. As of 1875, elections would be allowed. Voters could choose additional council members as the population grew. In 1875, there were only 3 elected members. Certain rules were made because there were so few members. Certain rules, no issues could be voted on if a member was in the washroom. As more people moved west from eastern Canada, more men were elected to the council. When there were 25 members, the group became known as the Legislative Assembly. The government of the Northwest Territories used both French and English at their meetings, and in their written records in 1892, the Assembly decided their work would be done in English only. The Legislative Assembly made decisions for the Northwest Territories. For instance, they could choose how to spend the tax money collected from citizens in 1877. They decided Francophone students in Northwest Territories had the right to learn in French at school. At this time in Canada, women and First Nations people did not have the right to vote. As of 1918, women could vote for representatives of the Canadian government. The year when individual provinces and territories granted women the right to vote varied. First Nations people received the right to vote in Canadian elections in 1960 and in Alberta elections in 1961. Many points of view. After 1896, there were more English-speaking Protestant settlers coming to Alberta than Francophone Catholic settlers. Laws about Catholic and non-Catholic schools did not change. However, some changes to laws about the language used in education were made. In 1892, the Assembly decided English would be the language of instruction in the Northwest Territories. They also decided there could be 1 hour of instruction in French each day. Various people had different points of view about this decision. Francophones were unhappy with the changes about language of education and in the Assembly. They felt the Assembly of the Northwest Territories was acting against them. Bishop Grandin of St. Albert believed in having Francophone Catholic schools. He wrote a letter to the Prime Minister asking that he support the Francophones. David Goggin had been appointed as the superintendent of education. He believed that schools should be less religious, English-speaking, and loyal to the British Empire. In 1897, Goggin directed all teachers to celebrate with their students the 60th anniversary of Queen Victoria's coronation, when she became a monarch. Egerton Ryerson was a Methodist or Protestant missionary in Ontario. His ideas and thinking influenced others. He believed in loyalty to the British Empire. However, he believed that French and English should be considered equal. How might Francophone Catholic parents have felt about their children being taught only in English at school? What are the differences between being able to make decisions for yourself and having somebody else make decisions for you?